How would you react if Lewis Hamilton told you that Ferrari had just taken the most important step since joining the team, even after finishing far from victory in Miami? Because yes, while most saw another difficult weekend for the Scuderia, something much bigger was brewing inside the Italian garage. Ferrari appeared at the 2026 Miami GP with a brutal improvement package, one of the most aggressive on the entire grid, changing practically half the car in a desperate attempt to catch up to McLaren and stop Red Bull's advance. But what was really shocking wasn't the new parts. It was Hamilton's statements after getting out of the car. The Briton hinted that Ferrari finally understood the real problem with the SF26 and that the new evolutions could completely change the course of the season. And be careful, because if what Lewis said is true, Miami could be remembered as the beginning of Ferrari's definitive resurrection in Formula One. Ferrari arrived in Miami under enormous pressure. The start of the 2026 season had left many doubts around Frédéric Vasseur's project and especially around the SF26. The car showed flashes of speed in certain sectors, but was still too inconsistent on long runs. It suffered greatly with aerodynamic balance, and most worryingly for Maranello, McLaren was beginning to slip dangerously away in the championship. The situation was beginning to recall scenarios from the past where Ferrari reacted too late while other teams evolved much faster. But this time they decided to do something completely different. And Miami was the setting chosen to practically launch a complete technical revolution. The magnitude of the improvements was so extreme that in Italy they began to talk about a new Ferrari B. Some specialized media claimed that up to 50% of the car had been modified compared to the first races of the year. We're not talking about simple small adjustments or superficial changes. Ferrari redesigned fundamental areas of the car seeking to solve the SF26's unpredictable behavior in fast corners and especially the enormous degradation problem that was destroying its races on Sundays. Lewis Hamilton had been insisting within the team for weeks that the car had potential, but that the operating window was too narrow. In other words, the Ferrari could be fast, but it was almost impossible to constantly keep it in the sweet spot. Miami represented the first serious attempt to correct that. And this is where one of the most impressive details of this entire project appears. Ferrari introduced 11 major modifications at once. 11. Something extremely unusual even by modern Formula One standards. They changed the front wing, completely modified the floor, revised the edge of the flat bottom, added a new diffuser, worked on the rear suspension, updated the beam wing, optimized the hydraulic systems, reduced weight, and also incorporated the famous Macarena rear wing, a completely different aerodynamic solution to what the rest of the grid was using. This new concept sought to brutally improve straight-line efficiency without destroying cornering performance, something that Ferrari had been pursuing for a long time. The most important thing is that Hamilton began to notice changes from the first moment. And that was key, because the Briton was coming off several extremely frustrating weekends where he constantly spoke of a nervous, unpredictable, and difficult to understand car. But in Miami the tone changed completely. Although the final results did not seem spectacular to many fans, internally Ferrari came out much more optimistic than the track positions reflected. Hamilton revealed after the race that for the first time he felt the team had found a clear direction of development. And that phrase within the world of Formula One means much more than it seems. Because when a driver talks about right direction, they are basically saying that they now understand how to unlock the car's real potential. Another very important detail was the famous Macarena rear spoiler. Although many took it almost as a visual curiosity, it actually represents one of the most aggressive concepts that Ferrari has tested in recent years. The idea behind this system was to maximize aerodynamic efficiency on the straight without sacrificing load in slow and medium corners. And although it still does not seem to be completely optimized, within the paddock it began to generate a lot of interest because Ferrari would be exploring a different philosophy from the rest of the teams. Some rival engineers were even surprised by the level of technical risk that the Scuderia took in the middle of the championship. That shows something very important. Ferrari understands that it can no longer play conservatively if it wants to defeat McLaren in 2026. They need real innovations. And Miami was probably the first clear evidence of that new mentality. But perhaps Hamilton's strongest revelation came when he spoke directly about the team's immediate future. Because the seven-time champion left a phrase that completely ignited the tifosi. He said that Ferrari finally understands where it should push development. And that statement carries a lot of weight coming from a driver with Lewis experience. We are talking about someone who worked for more than a decade in one of the most dominant teams in history like Mercedes. Hamilton knows perfectly well how to identify when a project is lost, and when a team is beginning to find the right path. That is why his words after Miami generated such an impact within the paddock. Because for the first time in a long time, Ferrari didn't seem to simply react to problems, it seemed to anticipate the future. And if they can make these improvements work as expected in the next races, the fight for the championship could radically change much sooner than many imagine. And while Ferrari internally celebrated having finally found stable technical direction, a very uncomfortable feeling began to grow in the rest of the paddock. Because it was one thing to see the Scuderia make mistakes or fall behind in pace, but it was quite another to hear Lewis Hamilton speak with this level of confidence just a few races after joining the team. And that began to worry McLaren and Red Bull especially. Because when Hamilton truly believes in a project, it usually means that something important is changing behind the scenes. In fact, one of the most telling aspects of the 2026 Miami GP was that Ferrari had not yet fully unlocked the potential of the new parts. This was dropped by several team engineers during post-race analysis. The evolved SF26 still had configuration issues and was still far from an optimal operating window. In other words, Ferrari achieved those results without yet fully understanding how to extract all the performance from the new aerodynamic package. And that is precisely what makes this situation so dangerous for its rivals. Because normally when a new car is born competitive from the beginning, it has less room for growth. But Ferrari believes exactly the opposite. They think they are just discovering what this concept can offer. Hamilton even hinted at something even more important. According to his own feelings, the improvements not only increased the pure performance of the car, they also changed the way you can drive it. And this is key. Because during the first races of 2026, Lewis seemed constantly limited by the behavior of the SF26. Many times he could not attack corner entries as he was used to at Mercedes, and that forced him to modify his driving style. But after Miami, he began to regain his aggressiveness. He began to feel again that he could attack the apexes, trust the front end, and especially manage weight transfers much better in fast corners. And when Hamilton finds confidence in the car, he automatically becomes a completely different threat. Within Ferrari, there is also another very strong feeling. They believe that the real test will come in Europe. Circuits like Imola, Monaco, or Barcelona will be decisive in confirming whether Miami was really the beginning of the definitive recovery or just a specific improvement. But the important thing is that, for the first time in a long time, the internal environment changed completely. They no longer talk only about minimizing damage or understanding problems. Now they talk about aggressive development, constant evolution, and fighting directly against McLaren. That psychological change may seem small from the outside, but in Formula One it changes everything. Because when a team believes in itself again, it begins to work with a different mentality, takes more risks, and accelerates development much more. And Ferrari desperately needed to recover just that. The most impressive thing about this whole story is that Miami could end up being remembered as much more than just a race. It may have been the exact moment where Ferrari left behind years of erratic development to finally begin a solid project around Lewis Hamilton. Because we are not just talking about new parts. We are talking about technical understanding, clear direction, a development philosophy that finally seems aligned with what a world champion driver needs to fight for titles again. And that is precisely what Hamilton revealed after getting out of the car. Ferrari is still not where it wants to be, but for the first time he feels that they really know how to get there. Right now, the big question within the paddock is not whether Ferrari improved in Miami. That was already clear. The real question is how much room for growth these new developments still hide. Because if the Maranello simulations are correct and they manage to completely optimize this concept in the next races, McLaren could very soon lose the tranquility with which it began the season. And perhaps the most terrifying thing for his rivals is this. Lewis Hamilton is just beginning to feel comfortable inside the new Ferrari. Ferrari left Miami without a trophy, without a victory, and still far from dominating Formula One. But even so, the 2026 Miami GP could end up being one of the most important races for the Scuderia in recent years. Because for the first time since the arrival of Lewis Hamilton, the team not only found performance, he found something much more valuable, a clear direction. And that was completely reflected in the 7-time world champion's words after the race. The 11 modifications introduced in the SF26 were not just another package of improvements. They were a declaration of intent. Ferrari understood that it could no longer continue to evolve conservatively while McLaren continued to widen its lead and Red Bull remained a constant threat. They needed to take risks. They needed to change the philosophy of the car. And above all, they needed to build a car capable of adapting to Hamilton's aggressive style. Because when Lewis feels real confidence in the car, history shows that it can completely transform a season. And perhaps that is precisely the most dangerous thing about this whole situation for the rest of the teams. Ferrari still doesn't seem to have unlocked the true potential of this new concept. Miami was just the first step. They are still understanding how the whole package works, how to optimize heights, balances, downforces, and mechanical behavior. But even so, Hamilton already began to feel important changes inside the car. He has already started to regain confidence. He has already begun to speak like a pilot who believes again in the project at hand. And that changes absolutely everything within a team like Ferrari. Because in Formula One, seasons don't always change with a spectacular victory. Sometimes they change silently, with a feeling inside the garage, with data that finally begins to coincide, with a world champion driver getting out of the car and saying that now they understand the right path. And that's exactly what happened in Miami. Ferrari did not leave the United States celebrating a result. It left Miami believing that it had finally found the basis to build something much bigger. Now all attention is on the upcoming races. Imola, Monaco, and Barcelona will be decisive tests to discover if this transformation is real or if it was just a momentary mirage. But one thing became very clear after the 2026 Miami GP. Lewis Hamilton no longer talks like a frustrated driver trying to survive a complicated car. Now he speaks as someone who is beginning to see real possibilities of fighting for the top again. And if Ferrari manages to develop this new SF26 correctly, the fight for the championship is still far from over. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.